Happy Tuesday. Today, all we're going to do is talk about one verse in particular. It's one claim that Jesus is making, but it's a big one. It's a doozy. It's what causes the religious leaders, those around Jesus, they physically pick up stones and they are bent on killing Jesus for what he says. So what does he say and why is it so controversial? It's in John, we're in chapter 10, verse 30. Jesus says, I and the Father are one. What does that mean? Why do they get so upset about this? To understand, we have to go back to the scripture we're reading for today from the Old Testament, which is Deuteronomy 6, specifically Deuteronomy 6:4. You've probably heard this before. You just may not have realized that you've heard it before. It says, Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. This is the famous Shema prayer. Here's how it finishes. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all of your might. The Lord our God is one. The Jewish faith was a monotheistic faith, and this was very important because there were many other faiths around at the time that were not monotheistic. And so Judaism actually stood out among all of those other faiths because they believed in one God. Adamantly, one God and one God alone. The Shema prayer was what they would have prayed at every time they prayed during the day, when they woke up in the morning, when they went to sleep at night. This was like the central tenet of their faith. It's like what we use as the Lord's Prayer. It's like what that would have been like for them. And it starts, the Lord is one. And so for Jesus to come and say somehow that he and the Father are one, they don't miss what he's doing. Jesus is claiming some type of connection with God, that they are unified in some way. Now, many different scholars have tried to make sense of this, and there is still some debate about what exactly Jesus means. Some would argue that Jesus is just claiming to be one with the Father in will. He does the Father's works. He's talked about that a lot in this passage. And so he is like lockstep with the Father. But I actually think it goes a little bit deeper than that. Remember back in John 1, the words that we read, like right when we opened this gospel, this is what it says, just to refresh your memory. In the beginning was the Word, which we know is talking about Jesus. And the Word, Jesus, was with God, as in distinct from God somehow, and the Word was God. So somehow Jesus, right from the very beginning, John is making this claim that Jesus is both separate from God, distinct from God, but also is God in some form or fashion. So that's the big question. What is the some form or fashion? How are Jesus and God unified? I think it's more than just a unity of will, an alignment of purpose. I think Jesus is actually claiming to be divine. And how do we reconcile that? How is it possible for Jesus and God to both be divine? Well, if you think about divinity like a title, what Jesus is claiming isn't to be one person with the Father. It's not like Jesus and God are actually one being and you can pray to each interchangeably because you're talking to the same being or the same person. I don't think that's it. I think what actually Jesus is talking about is he's one in essence with the Father. He shares the same characteristics and the same basic nature as the Father. And so in some way, that just blows my categories and really just boggles the brain. To be honest, it's okay if it does for you too, because I think this is one of those mysteries of the faith that we're just not going to get completely. But here's what's been helpful for me to kind of reconcile this idea of how can Jesus be one with the Father, but yet we also know that he's fully human. How can Jesus be fully human and fully divine at the same time? Okay, this is a picture by M.C. Escher. It's called Drawing Hands, and you see it here. And really, this picture just captures this idea perfectly because you really can't tell which hand came first. As soon as you start to get toward the idea of one hand being the dominant, you run into the fact that the other hand wouldn't exist without the hand that came before. These two hands are linked in a way that you can't separate and you can't deny. This is like the relationship between God and the Father. Jesus is fully divine. He shares the same characteristics and very nature of God. He is a deity. But at the same time, there is a distinction between Jesus and God. Jesus is fully human as well. And again, if this blows your mind, or if you can't quite wrap your head around that, that's okay. Christians for thousands of years have debated this idea and tried to piece it together, and I just don't think we'll have a full ability to comprehend the way that Jesus and the Father are fully unified, and yet Jesus can also be distinct from the Father. But here's another way to reconcile it. We actually have another thing in our possession that follows the same kind of model. We think about the Bible in this way. In part, the Bible was written by human hands. It is a human book. But at the exact same time, the Bible is divine. We believe that God and the Spirit had a role to play in this book. This book is both human and divine. It's the same with Jesus. You can't skew toward one or the other. In some way, it's a mixture of both in a way that is beautiful and beyond our comprehension. But this claim that Jesus is making toward unity with the Father, he's making this more of a deal than his humanity, because they can see his humanity, right? He's right in front of their face. They see him eating, they see him walking around, they see him living. What Jesus has to impress upon these religious leaders that they're not picking up, right? They want to know how he is claiming to be the Messiah, or will he make that claim? And Jesus actually gives them something so much deeper than that. It's like he's saying, yeah, I'm the Messiah, but I'm also one with God in a way that they will not accept. But we, looking back all of these thousands of years later, can just hope to begin to understand. I hope that this helps. There's a really great video on the Bible Project. If you just search God, it's one of the theme videos that will come up that explains this way better than I ever could. But warning, again, it will leave you with more questions than it has answers. It's just helpful for me. Happy reading. Hannah will be back with our video for tomorrow.